Hello, everyone. Welcome to an episode of Fireside Chats with Belfer Fellows. My name is Ahmed Sultan, and I'm the Associate Director for Research and Technology Policy at the ADL Center for Technology and Society, otherwise known as CTS. The Belfer Fellowship was established by the Robert Belfer Family and CTS to support innovative research and thought leadership on combating online hate and harassment for all. Fellows are drawn from the technologist community, academia, and public policy to push innovation, research, and knowledge development around the online hate ecosystem. ADL and the Center for Technology and Society thank the Robert Belfer family for their dedication to our work and their leadership in establishing the Fellows Program. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with a current Belfer Fellow, Professor Ari Waldman. Ari is a professor of law and computer science at Northeastern University. He is a widely published scholar, including 2 books, Privacy as Trust, Information Privacy for an Information Age, and an upcoming book, Privacy's Vicious Cycle, and more than 25 articles published in leading law reviews and peer-reviewed journals. Professor Waldman has won numerous awards and fellowships for his scholarship. Notably, he won the Best Paper Award at the Privacy Law Scholars Conference twice, in 2017 and 19, as well as the Privacy Papers for Policymakers Award in 2019. Welcome, Ari. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Doing well under the circumstances. I know this is a difficult time for so many of us.
That's true. I want to jump straight into it, and we have several questions for you today, so we're really excited to have you on board.
I'm super excited.
I hope you've been staying safe and that you're well in these uncertain times. You're in New York, where the coronavirus has upended the lives of many. We're now seeing technology companies trying to help public health authorities. Google and Apple recently released an exposure notification system that alerts users of potential exposure to others who have confirmed cases of COVID-19. How concerned should we be about initiatives like these? And what does this development say about society's evolving relationship with data privacy?
I think that's a great and timely question. I think we should start by acknowledging that there is no necessary conflict between using technology and stopping or stemming the tide of COVID in a privacy protective way. Technology can really help. It can take contact tracing, something that the medical community has been doing for quite a long time, and make it even better, as long as 3 things also happen. One is that if technology is done or created in service of what health officials and health experts need and want, rather than what technology companies want. So a lot of times technology companies make products that serve their own ends, their own informational capitalistic ends, which is fine in a capitalistic system. But here, these apps should not be in the business of enriching Silicon Valley executives. These apps should be in the business of public service and in assisting the work of contact tracers. So the first rule of thumb, let's put it to take a page out of Isaac Asimov, the first law of COVID-19 tracing apps should be help the health experts do what they need to do rather than help yourself. Another thing that we should think about is who controls the data and what happens with it. We need some data, right? In order to know who you've been in contact with, you need to know who you've been in contact with. So we need some information, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that information has to be controlled and used by a for-profit company whose business model entirely depends on knowing more and more and more about us. It can just as easily be stored and controlled by a nonprofit consortium created by community hospitals, or created in partnership with state health officials or federal health officials. That is, if we had a functioning federal response to COVID in the United States. So that's the second law of COVID tracing apps should be that the data should be stored and protected by a nonprofit entity that is solely interested in helping contact tracing. And then the third thing we should think about is what happens with the data when this is all over. We hopefully will not be in this situation forever. And the provenance, the future of the data really matters, because if you need to know who I've been in contact with, then that information can tell you a lot about a person. And that information, if given over or just allowed to be purchased or allowed to be transferred to anyone, or even used by the government to identify persons for potential deportation, for example, like how Palantir helps ICE find and arrest and deport those who are undocumented. So there needs to be some rules around what happens with the data. Now, those rules doesn't mean that these tracing apps aren't going to be successful. Academicians and technology companies in Europe have created apps that essentially function by identifying who has been in contact with you, but anonymously. So there are these continuously rotating numbers that when phones bump into each other, or bump into a kind of an area where another phone has been. And those numbers can be downloaded or can be identified. And then only the health officials or only the person who's in charge of the data knows who those people are, meaning that the individuals are protected if you haven't been exposed. So there are, even with rules, there are still options that are both highly successful or can be highly successful, help epidemiologists do what they need to do, and protect privacy at the same time.
As a huge Isaac Asimov fan, I really appreciated that. So while we're on the topic of recent and ongoing events, the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, Dion Johnson, and so many others have charged up grassroots movements against police brutality. In light of these protests, IBM, Amazon, and Microsoft announced that they would not sell or would pause police use of surveillance technology like facial recognition. For our audience, can you explain why this technology is so coveted by law enforcement and revered by civil society? Should we be celebrating this moratorium, or should it give us pause?
That's also another great and timely question. So let's start at the basics. So why do police departments, let's assume that their interest is genuine as opposed to totalitarian, but why would police departments want facial recognition technology? And maybe even take a step back from that and identify what that is. So this umbrella term of facial recognition technology refers to the use of artificial intelligence to identify people just by features on their face. So a face, just like any image, can be broken down into pixels, can be broken down into ones and zeros, can be broken down into code. And by the use of trained machines, trained computer, trained algorithms on identifying different facets of that face, you can identify who people are really just by passing them. Or when they come across a camera that is then, where images are then fed into a facial recognition machine or computer or algorithm. So it sounds pretty obvious based on that definition why a police department would want that. You can help them identify criminals. But let's distinguish between two types of face recognition. One is what we'll call facial recognition, which is, say, you want to identify a particular criminal, a particular alleged criminal, or one who's a suspect. Based on photos or drawings or eyewitness testimony, you might have certain data points, and then you may have a potential suspect, and you want to see, does this person meet these descriptions? And it would be great to use AI for something like that, right? That would improve our ability to identify potential suspects. And then there's a category, let's call it face surveillance. Face surveillance is the general use of AI, those pixelated or those broken down faces into little ones and zeros, in order to scan, in order to see who everyone is. This is the real kind of Orwellian problem, where a police officer can have a camera, or even, we're 10 years away from having it Iron Man style, like in our glasses, can walk down the street and have a program or have it Wi-Fi connected to a program that can identify pretty much anyone on the street based on an algorithmic analysis or an AI analysis of the face that they're just seeing walking toward them. This has great totalitarian and oppressive potential. You can imagine a protest happening in a city like New York or London, where the city is ringed by CCTV cameras, and you can take those images and connect those cameras to advanced face surveillance algorithms that will allow a government agent to identify particular protesters by name just as they pass by the camera. This is a far more advanced version of what J. Edgar Hoover did to the civil rights protests, right? And it is used as a tool to silence, to harass, and actually to engage violence, and finally arrest, to shut down movements. So the police want these tools in the name of law enforcement, but really they want to use them generally to maintain order. And maintaining order is often used as a way to say we should have no protests, right? All protests are disorderly. So there are obvious totalitarian problems with this. And that is the reason, some might say, that IBM, Amazon, and Microsoft, as you have noted, have called for and said that they will stop selling or not allow any more police to use their tools. Now, that's fine, but also not something that we should really celebrate, because there are tons of other smaller companies that are still selling to police and are still selling to the federal government and still joining with ICE in order to help deport those who are undocumented, even if they haven't committed crimes. And the perfect example here is Clearview AI. Clearview, which was profiled in a wonderful feature in the New York Times by the technology reporter Kashmir Hill, is a relatively small company that has built, allegedly, the largest collection of images of billions of people in the world by scraping images from LinkedIn, from Facebook, from Instagram, and so forth, in violation, by the way, of those platforms' policies. That company, according to the CEO's public statements, has absolutely not stopped its practice of contracting with law enforcement. So far, it was originally alleged that they had contracts with 60 police departments. Now that maybe there's evidence that that's far higher, in the 200 to 300 range. And he has come out and say, we have no plans on stopping our contracts with both public and private employers. So the fact that IBM, Amazon, and Microsoft can stop this particular program, which, by the way, they only said they're doing it for a year. It's only a moratorium for a year as they reevaluate. And the fact that they can do that and have it not affect the ability of law enforcement to use face surveillance really shows that what we need is not voluntary abeyance, but a ban, an absolute national ban on, at a minimum, police or government use of these technologies. I would also go so far as to say we should have a ban on the technology generally, because private use of these tools is just as much of a tool of oppression, because companies can use it to refuse to hire persons of color. They can use it as a way to launder their discriminatory practices that entrench the kind of racism that we're protesting against on the streets.
In your paper titled Safe Social Spaces, you write, technosocial spaces are designed to manipulate us and lull us into false senses of familiarity and confidence, thereby enticing risky disclosure. Can you explain in practical terms how social platforms are designed to do that? Short of passing a comprehensive data privacy law, what are other ways we can reclaim trust in our online environments?
There are a lot of things, a lot of tactics that I think a lot of us are familiar with that Facebook and other social platforms use to make it seem like this platform that has 1 billion users and is really there to line the pockets of Mark Zuckerberg is really just a group of friends. So the news feed, for example, is designed to make it seem like we're interacting with just a few people who are our best friends. Those of us who are on Facebook, you'll notice that before a post, it'll say, Ahmed, Ari, Lisa, and 47 other of your friends have liked this. And then below it, it'll highlight your friends plus the number of people who have commented on it. That triggers two things. It triggers the idea that your friends have done something that must mean like it's okay because you trust your friends. And also the number that's next to it, the higher that number goes, studies have shown the more likely people are to click on it and also engage, because there's safety in numbers. If 200 other people do something, it can't be that unsafe, right? So companies like Facebook have an interest in showing us all of the pro-social, or I actually say pro-disclosure or positive disclosure behaviors of others. What they don't show us and what they hide from our newsfeed are all the pro-privacy steps people take, how they navigate the privacy settings, who they open up their settings to their posts to see, who can see their posts, and what they do with their data, how often they erase it, how often those kind of things. So Facebook shows us all of the context of other people disclosing, but shows us none of the context of people protecting their privacy or being opposed or angry about what's been disclosed. So that's just one way. There are lots of other ways. Social media generally kind of gamifies or makes cute or engages our social inclinations just by how it's set up. Like, why do we put photos in our profile pictures? Well, profile pictures, if you have a smiling face or even a face, as opposed to an avatar or an icon of a human or a circle or just our initials, encourages disclosure. That's something that we've known for a really long time. That was part of the basic structure of social media. And in fact, when you do the opposite, it actually creates kind of this dehumanizing effect that's amplified by social media's anonymity or distance that creates other negatives. So there are positives on both sides, but one of the implications of having things like your quote underneath your face, your likes being shown to everyone else, is to make you feel like you're just having a conversation with other people. So these spaces, which I call technosocial, which is Kathy Strandberg's term, she's a professor at NYU. These technosocial spaces are meant to approximate the socialization norms of physical spaces while having it on technology, which really amplifies what you say. You're obviously not saying it to just one other person on a stoop. You're saying it to everyone who works for Facebook and everyone that can search a Facebook post. So there are these tendencies, and they're all designed in, and they're all meant to trigger our innate tendencies to share. And Facebook knows this, and it's made use of the psychological literature for some time. So what can we do in order to reclaim some privacy in these technosocial spaces? Well, there's a lot that law can do, but law can't do everything. So we need reform of the laws that immunize platforms from any bad thing that happens on their platform.
So you've been working on an ADL Belfer Fellowship project that explores how technology can be used to stalk, harass, and harm others, especially when it relates to intimate partner violence. How would you explain this topic to someone who could potentially be a target, but doesn't really understand the space enough to know the nature of the challenge?
So work done by some sociologists, including Karen Levy at Cornell, has already showed that not only are there apps that are on the App Store and on Google Play that they overtly invite people to say, hey, download this so you can stalk your girlfriend or you can stalk your ex or something like that. Not only are there tools like that, and we'll get into those in a second, but there are a lot of tools embedded in your phone already that can be manipulated and that can be used for bad purposes, even including something like Find Your iPhone, right? Which is helpful for us, but also if you are in an abusive relationship, which are now even more, the abuse is probably even more pronounced given stay-at-home orders. But if you're in an abusive relationship and someone forces you either through emotional or physical abuse to give access to access to your account, that person knows where you are at all times, everything that you're downloading, and so forth. So there are lots of tools that can be used, and these since they form a range, they're available on places like the App Store and built into other larger tools on the grounds that they serve other purposes. just because someone uses it for some bad purpose, Apple says and Google says, it doesn't mean that the app itself is bad, which is kind of shocking given what Google Play allows the app developer to write in its little blurb on the Google Play Store, especially when it says, this is stalkerware, right? So our research then has moved from this original research that's been done by others to look at three things. One, how do the platforms approach this problem? How do platforms approach the problem of technology-facilitated intimate partner violence when it is their technology or technology that they allow on their platform to be used to identify where everyone goes, what they download, who they're talking to, and so forth. And there are other tools that allow one phone to be connected to another phone and take screenshots of all the text messages, for example, that they take, like those kind of things. So what we've done so far is we've reviewed these community policies, the policies on what they allow on their platform. And Ahmad, as you know, we've tried to talk to the people inside these platforms. And as I talk about in my forthcoming book, these companies use a lot of strategy, a lot of different tactics to manipulate how academics talk about them. Companies tend to think that the problem is on the victim's shoulders to fix. They allow these tools to be downloaded from the store, but then they tell the victim, here are other things that you can download in order to protect yourself. They don't take any overt stance about the technology itself unless it reaches some really bad level, which it doesn't normally. And that has very little difference. There's very little difference between that and victim blaming. It's putting the onus on the victim to protect herself, and it's mostly always women, and not putting any onus on the app creator to design things in a way that cannot be used, or for the company to take responsibility to not allow technologies to be put on the platform or used with their phones that are stalkerware. The companies put all the onus on the individual. And this fits within a long history of powerful figures putting burdens on victims to protect themselves. This is in the abuse context, the assault context, the sexual assault context, and so forth. So that's one project that we're working on. The second project that we're working on is more law-related. How is technology facilitation in intimate partner violence and harassment changing the way law happens? And I mean law on the ground, like not new laws passed on the books, but how are lawyers changing their job, and how is law enforcement changing their job? So what does it say about evidence gathering? Are DAs doing things differently? Are they creating task forces that are just about technology? And if not, where is the expertise coming from to handle how these things work? Because the source code is beyond most lawyers. The way something works as a stalker app is not intuitive to a lawyer who may be trained in domestic violence, but not as trained in technology. So we're in the preliminary stages of this still, unfortunately, because a lot of our interviews were scheduled during the shutdown and during the shelter in place, but we're now starting to ramp up, going to do some Zoom and phone interviews, although those aren't ideal. But there are some police departments and DAs and state's attorneys' offices that have sufficient resources to dedicate a department. But where that happens, it's usually a person. And it's usually one person who has expertise in this area, except in some very lucky departments like in Seattle, where they have the benefit of being right near K&L Gates and having great forensic departments. And right near Microsoft, right? So, and then police departments also have money issues, but even with the wealthiest, this also has a link with the problems that we're seeing with so-called police reform legislation to solve the problem of police brutality. No amount of training is going to make police anti-racist. Similarly, no amount of training is going to make police understand what technology-facilitated intimate partner violence is. We need not just structural change inside police departments so they don't just turn away mostly female victims, and literally, as some policemen have said, come back to us when he actually hits you, right? So not only do we need structural change there, but we need to fund specific departments in police departments, specific people in police departments that this is what they're dedicated to. And then obviously we're going to learn more from the data that we gather.
What's the role of the law and lawmakers in all of this? Have you seen any recent bills that seek to address this specific problem?
We need a layered approach. There are right now 7 different proposals for comprehensive privacy legislation in the Senate and the House. Most of them proposed by Democrats. The 2 that are proposed by Republicans, one is by Marco Rubio, which is, I don't know why he even wasted time putting pen to paper, because it is just more of the same. The standard that we have right now in the United States for privacy protection is what we call notice and consent, or notice and choice. That's why companies have privacy policies, and they give you an opportunity to opt out, although companies don't even really do that. Marco Rubio's proposal is just be more transparent, more choice. That's bananas, that's nonsense. We shouldn't even think about it. Roger Wicker, who's the chair of the Commerce Committee, has proposed a slightly more robust privacy law that's just notice and choice, plus rights to access our information, rights to have our information deleted, changed, but also no enforcement mechanism. So what's the point of that law either? It doesn't allow anyone to enforce it other than the Federal Trade Commission, which can't even enforce notice and consent. So how are they going to enforce other rights? And then there are a series of Democratic proposals that range from holding executives criminally liable if they lie about their privacy protections, creating a new agency beyond the Federal Trade Commission, a data protection or a privacy protection agency that's proposed by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand here in New York, to a law proposed by Maria Cantwell and Brian Schatz of Washington and Hawaii, respectively, that would have what lawyers call private rights of action. Private rights of action literally means the ability to sue, the ability to sue a company for misusing your data. And that's the private rights of action is how we got things like seatbelts and side impact protection and safer cars that don't explode when you put the key in the ignition. Without that, and we got environmental protections with private rights of action. Without that, I don't think there's any hope for privacy protection in the United States. It's not a panacea. It could be abused, and there are other problems, but those are some proposals. I think another thing that we need to do is, in the legal space, in the privacy space, is we need to, instead of putting the onus on individuals to protect their privacy, to engage in privacy self-management, which is what Daniel Solov calls it, we need to put the onus on companies. We need to put the onus on the companies that create products to protect our privacy from the ground up. This would be what Brian Schatz has called duties of loyalty. Right now, Woodrow Hartzog and Neil Richards, 2 law professors, are writing a new article on what the duty of loyalty would look like. I've written about it in Privacy is Trust, as have Neil and Woody, and their work is outstanding. And what we're basically trying to do is take the obligations that lawyers and doctors have to us to not benefit while hurting us, to act in our interest, even while making a profit. You know, there is no world in which doctors and lawyers don't make money off of representing people, but they don't represent people and make money while harming us at the same time. So we want to pose those kind of obligations on technology companies as well. And that would be a big change. It would require, importing a doctrine from tort law into a new area in parts. It would be a big change, and it would be risky. It's not that there's no risk associated with this, but it's much better, much more robust than some of the proposals coming to the just more of the same.
At CTS, we've heard from countless targets of harassment who don't know what to do after being a victim to technology-mediated harassment, especially cyberstalking. For my last question, what do you recommend they can do to protect themselves from IPV related online harassment?
Mm. So, we live in a world where we still have to take steps to protect ourselves. And there are a couple of things I think people can do, even though I do believe that more should be done on the other side, on the company side. So first, let's start with the hardest. What do you do inside an abusive relationship? I went through an experience of living in an emotionally abusive relationship where an ex's low self-esteem was he leveraged that in order to keep me away from friends or to make me feel bad about reaching out. So what do you do in an abusive relationship, whether it's emotionally abusive or physically abusive? Because I remember what that's like. You don't feel like you have the power to do those things. Well, one thing that I have learned is that even when you don't feel you have the power to stand up to someone, or that you don't feel that you have value, or you're worried about the alternative, like loneliness, for example, that there are now actual tools on your phone that you can do without telling anyone. And that doesn't always work, turning off Find My iPhone, constantly check, like every day, check the how your phone is using data, like doesn't always work, especially because your abuser may find out that you've turned off a particular tool, and that could be dangerous. And that doesn't, any of those steps won't protect a person unless they can get out of that abusive relationship or go speak to someone who can help them. So that's going to be hard no matter what. There isn't a real good answer for that. But otherwise, there are lots of things we can do to protect our privacy and protect ourselves from being tracked. So there are privacy protective browsers. There are privacy protective search. So Firefox is a privacy protective browser. DuckDuckGo is a privacy protective search tool. These are all things that are used by harassers and abusers to see what people are up to. So there are many stories, for example, that I have heard from in opposite sex as well as same-sex couples where an abusive partner is looking through someone's search history to see if they're searching for pornography, which is totally legal, and lots of people do, and using it as a source, as a reason to engage in abuse if someone looks for pornography. So there are ways to use tools that you have in the house in a privacy protective way. It's important to also learn about these things. So I recommend reading the work of Danielle Citron, reaching out to an organization that I'm on a board of called the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative. The Cyber Civil Rights Initiative was set up by Holly Jacobs, who is a victim of revenge porn, and is run by Marianne Franks, as I mentioned earlier. And what we're dedicated to is not representing in court, but representing the interests of and advocating for victims of technology-facilitated harassment. And on our website is a series of steps that people can take. If you need to go even further, like actually go and litigate or get an order of protection or advocate for yourself in court, then there are a handful of lawyers that can be helpful. Right here in Brooklyn is an outstanding fierce lawyer named Carrie Goldberg, who has made an entire groundbreaking career on representing victims, mostly female, but not always, victims of online harassment. She represented a victim of impersonation and revenge porn, a gay victim of impersonation and revenge porn on Grindr, and sued Grindr. But again, Section 230 was in her way. So this conversation now comes full circle. In addition, there are lots of clinics. So at law school, so at my former law school, I set up the first law school clinic dedicated to representing victims of online harassment. And the students of that clinic got orders of protection, got images taken down from platforms, got schools to take student harassment seriously, got copyright assignments and photos so people can get them taken down, worked with platforms to protect people. So there are lots of, and those are all free. And so there are a lot of things you can do. Also, there's an organization called Day One, which is the litigation director at Day One is Andrew Santa Anna, who runs my clinic runs the cyber harassment clinic. And he's outstanding. He is a queer person of color, and he understands he comes from the DV or the IPV world and has been last few years focusing almost exclusively on technology. And at Northeastern, we hope to set up a similar clinic for those in the New England and Boston area. So there are lots of people to reach out to, lots of places to gain more information. And also always in the background, for those who are victims of abuse, there are organizations like the Anti-Violence Project, Trevor Project for queer people, and in some cases, social workers and your local police department. But I would go to the local police department with someone who can help you. There aren't any easy answers to something like this, but one of my goals in this project and with the support of the ADL and with the support of my university is to create a space where we provide information and also provide avenues for obtaining justice.
Thank you, Ari, for this riveting discussion and for sharing your own personal experience on this matter. I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. And I'm looking forward to your upcoming book, Privacy's Vicious Cycle.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to work with you and with the Anti-Defamation League.